Welcome to the Heartland Journal podcast with Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Hello, welcome back to the show. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and pass it around. We only grow with your help. Thanks for doing it. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today, we are talking with special guest Lars Larson. Lars got his start in radio at age 16, spinning records and reading news, sports, and weather at the edge of a cow pasture in Tillamook, Oregon on the mighty 1590 KTIL. 49 years later, he's only moved 75 miles east to Portland and light years to the right. The Emmy and Peabody Award winner delivers 6 hours of radio backed by 4 decades of experience as a radio and television journalist. 6 hours of daily prep keep the Lars Larson Show on top of the news cycle and top of mind for listeners across the country. Along the way, Lars has worked for more than a dozen radio stations and 5 television stations. Today, Lars hosts 2 syndicated radio shows, one for the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho on the Radio Northwest Network. The national Lars Larson Show goes out to more than 100 radio stations from Maine to Honolulu and from Anchorage to Corpus Christi. Flagship affiliate stations for both FM News 101 KXL carries all of the Northwest Show and 1 hour of the national from noon to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The RNW network, launched in 2000, includes 26 stations in the Pacific Northwest, the largest broadcast medium in the region. Compass Media Network launched the national in September 2003. 21 years later, the show continues to grow. Lars currently has multi-year contracts with both Compass Media Networks and Alpha Media. Much to his wife Tina's delight, Lars has picked up more than 70 awards from the Associated Press, Society of Professional Journalists, the National Press Club, including 2 Emmys and a Peabody for his reporting and documentaries. He has broadcast live from the East Room of the White House, where he interviewed President Donald Trump one-on-one. He was one of the first guests for the inaugural Skype press seats at the White House. He has broadcast from Israel 5 times. Every year, Lars takes the show to the Stanford University campus as a media fellow and interviews some of the top minds in the world at the Hoover Institution. He has interviewed many high-profile politicians, celebrities, athletes, and authors, including Rand Paul, Katie McFarland, Sheriff David Clark, Ted Nugent, John Strassel, Carl Malone, Rob Reiner, John Lovett, Steve Baldwin, and many more. Lars has been invited as a guest on Fox News and has appeared on Outnumbered, Fox and Friends, Scarborough Country, BBC Radio, and countless local radio and television news shows around the United States. And now he's hit the big time. He is on the Heartland Journal with me for you. Let's do this. Hello, how are you today from lovely Portland, Oregon?
I'm doing very, very well. I mean, considering that I'm in a region where I'm surrounded by unbelievers, heathens, and pagans.
Yes, Lion's Den with the Lion of Judah right behind you. Makes sense. We'll call you Daniel, but you do have, your name is Lars Larson. You couldn't have a better radio name than that. I mean, Abramowitz, it doesn't roll off the tongue.
Yeah, but Lars Larson's my real name, in case that's a question. My parents gave it to me, and it has served me well.
I bet it has. I always said, if Arnold Schwarzenegger can do it, I'll keep my name. But you've done it for many, many moons longer than I have. And the thing I love about this podcast, sir, is I get to talk to people that have been doing this a lot longer than I have, but I've heard of, so I can invite them on and learn from. I lived in Seattle for 20 years, and I saw the once great state for 15 of those years slip to the dystopia it is now. Highest gas prices, unaffordable housing, terrible schools that used to be the best, 35% death tax rate now. So don't die in Washington, folks. You've stayed on the toughest beat in the country, I believe. I'd say Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Brad Little is as woke as they come. So tell me, why have you chosen to stay there?
I've stayed here because this is my home. I've spent most of my life in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I've moved around a bit. When I was a kid, my father was a national park ranger for a while, so we lived in Montana at Glacier National Park. We lived in Washington State and Mount Rainier. I went to high school in a town called Tillamook that's famous for cheese, so I'm a cheese maker. But other than that, I just think it's a beautiful place to be. The fact that it's filled with people who've made really terrible decisions about their leadership. And as you say, Washington State is in the soup financially. They have major corporations that are either leaving or diminishing their presence. Oregon has the same problem. I was just going through a list of those because tomorrow the Oregon legislature plans to pass the biggest tax hike in state history, bar none. And Washington State just last year passed the biggest tax increase in state history. And I wonder, what do you think when people say your region's in trouble, business is down, unemployment is high, Oregon is fourth highest unemployment rate in America, Washington State a bit behind that. And then you say, I know the perfect idea. Let's raise taxes and have even higher costs for both citizens and for businesses when the region is already financially ailing. If that's the decision making of Democrat liberals, you understand why America is veering to the right, because they see President Trump wanted to have a tax drop for everybody, and he got it in 2017. He's now persuaded the new Congress to extend that tax cut and make most of it permanent, and that's good. The states that are saying we're in financial trouble, but government needs money, so let's raise taxes, raise regulations, make it more expensive to do business here. And then I know what they plan to do. When the layoffs come and the unemployment rises even higher, they're going to say, it's those darn Trump tariffs. And you say, hold on, is it the tariffs or the fact that you folks have been raising taxes by gigantic leaps and bounds? Which one do you think is more likely?
Yep, that's what they always do, and they're going to use it as a shield and then a sword from right behind it. And if you want less of something, tax it more. Guess what? But this didn't happen overnight. This has been a long time coming. So how have you avoided getting shadow banned or canceled or knocked off the air in a liberal market and cut from getting sideways with these draconian leaders like Inslee and Inslee plus one, Bob Ferguson, the weasel I call him, Brown.
Tina Kotek.
Tina Brown before her, Tina now in Oregon.
And Little over in Idaho, who actually is making some sensible choices. So in some ways, think about, before I get to how I didn't get knocked off, think about this. Ben Franklin loved the idea of laboratories of democracy. That's what he considered the 13 colonies that became states. And he said, what we can do is have a country where the federal government has a limited role, should be a lot more limited than it is today. We'll put those limitations in the Constitution, the so-called enumerated powers of the federal government, and they are to stay in their lane. They have not stayed in their lane, but we're pushing them back there now. Then we'll allow the states to make the decisions. We're going to regulate heavily, we're going to tax heavily, we're going to do this, or we're going to be more laissez-faire, have the lowest possible tax rates. And there are a number of conservative states in America that are even now dropping their tax rates, even though prices have gone up because of Joe Biden's 4 years of inflation. So he saw that as a benefit because it meant that somebody in one state could say, why are taxes so high here and low over there, and their citizens get the services they want and they pay a lot less and I'm paying a lot more? And then citizens at the ballot box can make the same decision that you or I would do. If you walked into your favorite place to have lunch and they presented you with the check and you said, hold on a second, I used to come in here for lunch with a friend and it cost us $25 and now it's $50. If you can't explain that, I'm going somewhere else. You can either have citizens move or they can say, let's change our state and do more of what they're doing next door. That was Ben Franklin's idea of laboratories of democracy. Now, to the point of how I don't get knocked off, people say, how can you be...
Just for the record, Washington and Oregon didn't exist then, so they didn't get the memo.
That's right. That's right. But he knew, I mean, the founders of our country were geniuses.
Totally.
Some of the people who run the government now are idiots, but they were geniuses then, and they could foresee the day when citizens... I don't know that Franklin ever would have imagined 50 United States that spanned from coast to coast, but maybe he did. In any case, even if it had stayed 13 states from the 13 original colonies, the colonists or the state, the citizens of those states could have looked next door and said, we don't have to have taxes this high. They don't have taxes that high in the state next door, and they seem to get everything done just fine. So how do I not get knocked off? Let me make this has always been my favorite metaphor for illustrating this. If you were trapped in a big, huge desert and there was no water in sight and you crawled for days to get out of that desert, and when you arrived at the edge of the desert, somebody had a murky, cloudy, room temperature glass of something that kind of looked like water, but it had a bunch of junk in it, would you take a drink of it? Of course you would, because you've been dehydrated for 2 days. In the Pacific Northwest, when you look at media writ large, the major newspapers as they still exist mostly online, the major TV stations, all the media is what? It tilts hard to the left. It presents a left message. Now, the fact that the Pacific Northwest is, say, majority liberal and minority conservative, it means that when those conservatives that are still here in Oregon, it really is closer to a 50-50 arrangement than most people would think. I mean, most people paint Oregon and Washington as solid blue states. But when you look at the votes on ballot measures and things like that, it really does come closer to 50-50. But even still, let's say Republicans are in the minority in Washington state, minority in Oregon. When they look around media and they say, I want to listen to something that I can actually identify with, you say, okay, what can I watch? Local TV news? Nope. You're going to get a hard left point of view from them. The one that excuses criminals, that excuses illegal aliens, that excuses every tax hike that comes along. And you say, that I don't identify with that. So what are they left with? They're left with me and other conservative hosts. I have a number of friends who are conservative hosts. I have two syndicated shows. One is national, and it goes all the way from Maine to Honolulu and all the way from Anchorage to South Texas. And then I have a Northwest show that is syndicated for 3 hours for Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And when those stations and the other hosts that are on those stations, and they're good hosts, when they run my show, people apparently identify with it because it's their only port in a storm or their glass of murky water at the edge of a dehydrated desert.
Well, you're very clear, so that's a good drink of water, but you are the only game in town, so that makes sense. You know, that's like when Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch moved to America, they saw half the market was no one was catering to them, so why not? Boom, instant billionaires. I'm old enough to remember 1999 and WTO, anti-globalization protest, November 30th to be exact. You remember that?
Yep, I surely do.
I call that the Big Bang, or being present at the creation, like Dean Acheson said for the FDR peacetimes government. After that all died down, the news quit covering it, but it kept going. People don't know because the Pacific Northwest is somewhat irrelevant politically, nationally, but
sadly.
Yes, but it was the late 1990s, and the Eugene, Oregon scene had all this activism, tension, and violence. It wasn't just Nirvana and Soundgarden. It was this. Bottle throwing, drunken college students confronted police. Tree sitters drew clouds of pepper spray as they tried to halt a downtown housing development. They drove metal rods into tree trunks, known as tree spiking, and a dangerous practice meant to damage loggers.
Oh, it was meant to kill loggers. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate that, but I grew up as the son of a forest ranger. I spent a lot of time in the woods. I knew a lot of people in logging families in Tillamook. And those spikes are not just designed to keep someone from cutting the tree down. They are meant that when an honest, law-abiding, hardworking, usually a man, but there are some women who do logging as well, went out to fell a tree, that's not bad grammar. That's what they say. You fell a tree. That when they hit that spike, sometimes ceramic spikes, so you can't even detect them with a metal detector, the chain on your chainsaw may break and whip back at you and either kill you or do serious injury. So understand, that's the level of violence that was being used by the warm and fuzzy bunny huggers.
Exactly. Good point. So they were anarchists, and they regularly hit the streets, decrying consumerism, corporate greed, excess police force, defund the police, and government in general. They drew more police gas, beanbag shotgun rounds, and arrests by the scores. Tell everyone about your experience with baby Antifa anarchists in their own hometown.
Well, I consider one of my favorite people to bring on the show a guy named Andy No, who was a PhD student at Portland State University when we first started putting him on. Today, he's a very acclaimed journalist, and he kind of belies all the stereotypes of the left. He is a foreign national immigrant. He is gay, and he is very, very conservative,
Asian.
and he covers conservative causes. He was nearly beaten to death on the streets of downtown Portland. In fact, his doctors warned him that the brain bleed that he got, internal, bleeding in the brain that resulted from the beating he took from Antifa, was likely to affect him for the rest of his life and might even take his life at some point. They were glad that he survived initially, but they said the fact that you've recovered from this does not mean it's not going to cause you problems later on. Think about that level of violence.
He was hit in the head with a cement milkshake.
Yep. And the cement milkshakes really need to be explained, because what they do is they mix up, if you've ever mixed sackcrete is what they call it. It has a lot of aggregate in it, it has sand in it. And if you throw that in somebody's face, it is putting all kinds of things into your eyes, into your nose, into your mouth that are going to cause you problems. It's a very toxic mixture. It's usually got calcium in it. So I'm actually going to pour some concrete this weekend. And you have to be aware, when you get that stuff on your hands, it'll actually cause abrasions. It'll, the lime in it will affect your hands. You need to wear gloves. And they threw this in a man's face, and then they beat him about the head.
This is before they invented frozen water bottles, which is less toxic, but still hurts like hell when it's frozen.
Yeah, and when they threw it on him, and there are pictures of this happening. So understand, that's the level of violence. I mean, we've been talking a lot this last week about violence from the left. And I'm really tired of the both sides do it nonsense, because it really isn't true. Just ask yourself this. When was the last time that somebody tried to assassinate an American Democrat president? Well, that would be John F. Kennedy. And yet you had 2 assassination attempts on Trump. According to the Secret Service, 3 more that were planned by foreign actors. You'd think that America would be, if you were outraged by the assassination of JFK, then you would think 2 actual attempts, and 1 that came about a quarter of an inch from taking the life of Donald Trump. But people on the left were nonplussed. They were just, okay, yeah, too bad. We don't like him.
Well, it was anarchists that triggered World War I, so this is the same type of thing. So certain activists,
Archduke Ferdinand, correct, and that one shot.
Correct. I'm not that old, but yeah.
What do you do when the left is constantly talking about, Maxine Waters, get up in their faces and make it clear they're not welcome here? Hold on a second. You disagree with somebody and they're not welcome here? I want to tell you one of the things I'm most proud of with this show that I've been doing for about 30 years, just short of 30 years, is that at the beginning, I had a young lady who worked for me. She now works for a liberal talk show host, and I think she's more comfortable with Tom Hartman. But I told her, I said, we're going to have a new approach to this, because back then, most talk hosts screened out anybody who didn't agree with the host. And I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to go the other direction. We're going to say naysayers go to the head of the line. She said, what do you mean? I said, when somebody calls in and says, Lars is completely wrong, we'd all benefit from higher taxes, or we'd all benefit from a wide open border, or we'd all benefit from catering to the whims of transgender and saying that it's okay for doctors to use hormones and a knife to cut body parts off teenage kids. If you believe that's right, we're going to put you first in line, give you the chance to make your case, and all I want to do is ask some questions. Naysayers go first is a hallmark of not just my show, but think about what good conservatives do. They're never afraid to face a crowd and say, tell me why you think I'm wrong about this, and have a conversation about it. And both sides can state the facts, the arguments they make, and the audience, my audience, can listen. And if my arguments, my counter arguments to a naysayer will not stand up to the naysayer's points, then I should go back and rethink my position. I don't have to do that very often because I try to prep well for the show, which means if I come in and take a position, I hope it's well thought and well founded, grounded in good, solid information. If it's not, then that's my bad. If it is well founded and somebody makes a counter argument, I should be able to answer all those things. And in some ways, that's what our U.S. Congress should be doing. They don't do much of it these days, but they should pass laws after having a hearing and debate and let folks listen to both sides and say, I'm going to vote for the side that makes the most sense, the one where the arguments seem to add up, better than the other side. Again, Congress doesn't do nearly enough of that. They shoved all those duties off on the bureaucracy, which means that for the most part, Americans are subject to They're subject to rules that are written by unelected bureaucrats who are unaccountable to the public, who have basically lifetime tenure. And they have these sinecures, these positions in government bureaucracies where they can't get fired, or at least until Trump came along, they couldn't get fired. And they can write whatever rule they want and go as crazy as they want. And if you say, who made that a law? I want to vote them out in the next election. You're told, I'm sorry, you can't. They're in the bureaucracy and they can't be fired.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't remember this, but I do, and I'm going to play it at the end of this show. You had me on your show, or let me on your show, to describe why I was leaving Seattle, because they wanted to allow kids of other sexes into my kids' summer rec league, swim league, and so that was a big highlight for me. Before I even had a show, that was like, I got to tell people about this, and you were one of the ones who would listen. But I want to get a little deeper into Oregon, and then we'll move on to some other stuff. But certain activists, including locals and an additional group of anarchists from Eugene, Oregon, where they'd all gathered that summer of 1999 for a music festival, advocated more confrontational tactics and conducted vandalism of corporate properties in downtown Seattle. We just talked about WTO. In a subsequent manifesto, they listed the particular companies targeted, which they considered to have committed corporate crime, all their favorites: Starbucks, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, all the usuals. This was Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition corporate shakedowns for white kids, wasn't it?
Yep, it really was. And that kind of tactic, I think, is just absolutely reprehensible. If you want to make a good argument for your side, go ahead. But now it's become threats and intimidation. Consider how we ended up here in 2025 with defunded police departments in major American cities, including Seattle, including Portland, that were already lightly policed to begin with. And I say that based on actual numbers. City of Seattle, City of Portland had a level of policing by population, and that's usually how it's gauged, that was already small to begin with. And then after the mobs took to the streets and demanded defund the police, they got even smaller. And it will probably take a decade or more of concerted effort to bring those police departments back up to an adequate level. And I want your audience to think about this idea. America rejected mob rule a long time ago. Democracy, which the Democrats insist on saying we have to save American democracy. We don't have a democracy. We have a representative form of government because pure democracies fail. They always fail. We are not a democracy because in a democracy, mob rule is the rule. Now, imagine what happened in mob rule. Mark Twain wrote about that a long time ago, when a young woman had said that she had been ravished, meaning she was sexually assaulted, and they went out and found the first black suspect they could and said he must have done it, and they lynched him. And then they found out later, no, actually he didn't do it. And Twain wrote some great essays about what had happened. That's mob rule, where you simply decide based on what the mob says. I want you to think about these numbers and this idea. You have a city in Seattle of about 800,000. You have a city in Portland of about 700,000 people. And a couple of thousand people show up in the streets and demand defund the police. Should the local government say, we should listen to this loud mob because they're loud and they are threatening violence and they are doing damage and they're right outside our door? Should we consider what they want, or should we consider what's best for the 700,000 people we represent in Portland or 800,000 people we represent in Seattle? You know what these cowards on city councils and county commissions did? They said, we're going to listen to the mob in the streets. Now, is that the way Americans want the government run? That whatever mob is the biggest mob? And in foreign protests, you'll see groups of people. Sometimes they're a mob, sometimes they're just peaceful protesters who will number in the hundreds of thousands. Should the government be a government that simply says whatever the mob says, that's what we're going to deliver? Because I think that is not American representative government. There are times that the speed of the government and the way it operates is very frustrating. But it was designed by the founders to be a system that took careful consideration of every decision. I think that anybody who's watching this, who's ever, and I've done it too, made a snap decision about something, a snap decision to quit your job, a snap decision to move somewhere else. Sometimes they work out well. More often, snap decisions do not work out well. No. On the other hand, what happens when you take a careful, considered, thoughtful approach to decisions. I mean, every time I've ever made a major job change in my life, I've said, I'm pretty convinced to take this job. Give me 24 hours. I sit on it for 24 hours and I make the decision. Usually, I can't remember a time where I didn't make the decision I was going to make at that moment. But the fact, two things. One, I thought about it for 24 hours. Second, when I've made the decision, if it turns out, and sometimes carefully considered decisions don't work out well, at least you can look back and say, I didn't make a snap decision. I took 24 hours to think about it. I believed it was the best decision, even if it works out badly, and usually they don't, but you can say, well, at least I thought about it before I did it.
This is the reason why it was so dangerous that all the legislatures in America, especially in Washington State, handed emergency powers over to Dunderhead Jay Inslee for 1,000 days and let him just do what he thought best when he doesn't think anything. That's the opposite of a constitutional republic.
And there were supposed to be safeguards built in that said the governor can have emergency powers for 30 days. And we can all imagine when you might need that. At some point, the West Coast will be hit by a major subduction zone earthquake offshore. There may be a tsunami that follows. There will be terrible damage if we get the 8 or the 9 that has been predicted. It may come now. It may come literally 300 years from now. But if you have that, and you say, we need somebody to make fast decisions right now. We have major damage. We have people dying. We have things that need to be done. The governor gets emergency powers for 30 days. But at the end of 30 days, then you have time to pull that legislature, all the people's representatives back together, and they get to oversee the decisions at that point. That's a sensible way to do it. Give him the emergency powers right now, but only for a certain period of time, then hand it back to the people's representatives. They may decide that what he's been doing is perfectly the right decisions, but he knows that he will be watched over by the people's representatives, that his emergency powers only last that long. Simply saying it's yours for 1,000 days is crazy.
Yeah, and hope it's a Republican like Trump who will bring in the National Guard and not somebody like Bob Ferguson who sued Trump 99 times. And won't let the National Guard even come into the state from out of state.
Well, let me ask you: would it have made sense for Inslee to have brought in the National Guard when the Antifa/BLM took over the CHOP zone or the Chaz zone? They called it both names. 6 square blocks of downtown Seattle, including where people lived, where their businesses were, and they simply forcibly took it over, burned a police precinct, and then held it for 6 weeks. That would have been a perfect time to bring in the National Guard and say, local police cannot begin to handle this. We're going to bring about order. Instead, the governor and the mayor and to some extent the police chief, although one police chief simply resigned because she said, this is crazy. I'm not going to do these things. And they allowed Antifa and BLM to make their own de facto militia, armed militia, illegally armed militia, by the way, and controlled 6 square blocks of a major American city, and they saw no pushback at all.
I live 10 blocks from there, so yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And of course, and I also saw the riots in LA when I lived there. That's when they did bring it. Pete Wilson, who was a Republican, did bring in the police, worked very heavily with Chief of Police Gates and the National Guard, and that's how they put that thing down. Believe me, I am well aware. And what is it, 90 days in Portland today, still, and the clock is still ticking. They haven't done exactly this because they're not equipped for an emergency, obviously. And so the fact that it came from Eugene, Oregon, makes all the sense to me. I mean, they ran around circles with the A in it. So 6 years later, we had this problem. A big reason.
And by the way, do you remember the moniker they would graffiti on the side of the buildings? ACAB, ACAB. You know what that stands for? Yeah. All cops are bastards.
Yeah.
Now, if you start from the premise that the people designated as the people who are the law enforcement force in a city, that they're all bastards, if you start from that premise, I think it's already a flawed premise. To say all cops are, if you say we want the police to be run well, we want them to be prevented from excesses, yeah, sure, I'm with you on that. But if you start with the premise that we want to get rid of all police, but something always comes in to replace it. And that was one of the ironies of the CHOP and Chaz zones in Seattle, was they said, we don't want the police here. So what happened immediately? Well, Antifa and BLM decided we have to have somebody who can tell people you must do it this way. So we'll have this de facto militia. armed people. And there were 3 murders that happened in the CHOP zone.
Oh yeah.
And they couldn't even get medical help to one of the victims in time to save his life, a teenage boy. And you say, hold on, how is that possible? And you say, because something had to come in to take the place of the police. And in this case, it was simply a de facto police force named by Antifa and BLM and answerable to no one.
And
Does
before
that
the
sound like
world
a
knew
good idea?
And before the world knew the acronym DEI, we had a chief of police who literally surrendered the precinct in Chop Chaz, which they burned to the ground with all of its records and whatnot. This is what anarchy is. This is what the circle with the A in it is. And a big reason also why you have smoke in the air every year is because of these eco-terrorists or a homeless camp. One or the other kind of go together. And by the way, Lars, this is all before 9/11 and the war on terror. So some young people listening to us right now, they weren't even born then. But I think it's important because it is some of the same people, like the Weather Underground before them, that became Antifa, became BLM. Trump said in 2020, 5 years ago, he'd make them domestic terrorists.
Yep.
He didn't. So they've been emboldened ever since. You can see videos of how shocked they are when they finally get arrested this year because they've been given a pass for 5 years. My friends, Dave, and your friends, Katie Davis Court, Jonathan Cho, citizen journalists have been documenting this for a long time, and you, including the NGOs that pay for it. Are you happy to hear Trump may send National Guard and more ICE agents like he did in Memphis recently?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. He's given all these cities fair warning, and he did this in his first term. He said either straighten out the problems in your own city, especially around the federal buildings. Remember, there's a relatively new federal courthouse in downtown Portland that ended up boarded up. The rioters in 2020 tried to set fire to it. They had to board it up, and he sent in federal officers to enforce the law and to protect those properties. They did not just simply go out and start rounding people up. And so the result was the president said, you can straighten this problem out yourself, or I will go in and straighten it out for you. Now, look how that worked out in Washington, D.C. His 30 days of control of D.C. Policing is about to end. But at the beginning of it, Muriel Bowser, the mayor, who you won't find a more left-wing liberal than Muriel Bowser, mayor of Washington, D.C., but she screamed bloody murder, that how dare Trump come in and say he was going to take over crime control and policing. And yet, about 10 days ago, Muriel Bowser came out and told reporters, this is working. Carjackings are down 87%, murders have dropped to almost zero, and Washington, D.C. was averaging 200 murders a year. So every day and a half or so, every 3 days, there were 2 murders. That was the ratio. And last year, there was 1.5 murder. There were 1.5 murders per day, 500 in the year. This year, we were on track to hit 200. And then Trump comes in, and there are only a couple of murders in 30 days. Not that a couple of murders isn't something to be taken seriously, but it's dramatically below the level. In 30 days, you would expect to see 20 murders. That has not happened under Donald Trump.
It's an amazing recipe when you bring order, just like at the border, no pun intended with the rhyme, but all you had to do was have a change of president, I guess, a change of leadership.
Well, a change of president and a president who had the guts to say to D.C., for all the people who complained about it, saying, how dare the president take over D.C., I got news for them. Read the Constitution. It provides for a place to be established for the seat of our national government. The founders were smart. They said there were a couple of them who wanted to have the capital in New York City or in Philadelphia. And you said, no, if we put the national government in any one state, that state will have, there will be a bias toward that state. So we want to put it in a place that is not a state. So they borrowed some land from some of the states and formed the District of Columbia. It has always been a creation of the federal government. It has always been under the federal government's control. Now, about 45 years ago, Washington, D.C. got what's called Home Rule Authority, which meant they could have their own charter, they could write some of their own laws, but they were still a creation of the federal government. And a lot of people who live in American cities may not know this. Your city is a creation of your state. That is, when a city is formed, it is formed with the authority of that state, because the 50 independent states are somewhat sovereign, and the state can say, we're not going to allow you to form a city. They don't just happen, and they aren't just, generated out of nothing.
Yeah,
They are there with the
the
authority of the
Democrats just
state.
want their two new senators because they overwhelmingly vote Democrat. We know that much. But
They want two senators and they want one rep, and they want to be treated like a state, and they're not. So what you could do is simply say, if you want to be represented by a senator, then move to Virginia, move to Maryland, move to any of the states around it. You'll be represented, but you don't live in a state.
or
You live.
California, where both senators actually do live in Virginia. They're not even from California. That's funny.
Yeah, well, and then consider the state of Oregon. I've complained about this for 20 years. There's a guy by the name of Ron Wyden. He's one of the most senior Democrats in the U.S. Senate. Do you know where Ron Wyden, senator from Oregon, lives?
If it's like Maxine Waters, nowhere near his district.
He lives in New York City. And how do I know that? Because he is married to a woman. He has three small children. They're school-age children. They live in New York City. She has ties to New York City. Her granddad founded a bookstore, so she got her money the old-fashioned way. She inherited it, and she married Ron Wyden, and they were both multimillionaires when they got married, and they're very rich, and they live in New York City. Now, how do you claim to represent a state when you don't live in that state? You live 3,000 miles away. She's registered to vote in New York State. He's not. He's registered to vote in Oregon, but only by virtue of using an address that is his office in Oregon. He may own property in Oregon, but if I owned property in New York City, would that make me a New York City resident? It would not. You can choose your state of residency, and frankly, you kind of have to because the IRS insists that you
Yeah.
tell them. Donald Trump changed his official state of residency from New York after so many decades to Florida. So, but my question is, the people in Oregon have tolerated a guy from New York City saying, I represent your state. He doesn't really have a connection to the state. And,
No.
and there's a reason that we have senators from a state. And I know there are senators who spend, a few months a year in some other state because it's cold in the wintertime and they go to some other warmer state. But when you actually make your permanent home, I would suggest the way you can tell somebody's state of residency, where do you put your head on a pillow the majority of the days in a year?
And he probably
If you
pays
put your head
Oregon.
on a
He
pillow
probably
in New
pays
York,
Oregon taxes and not New York taxes, which are outrageous. So even though they're getting
well, and
worse.
even if he pays taxes here, there are plenty of people who live in New York City and they pay a gigantic amount of taxes for some fancy house they've got in the Hamptons. Does that mean they get to vote in Hamptons elections? No, it
Nope.
doesn't.
Nope.
They,
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, it should not even be legal, but that's the way they roll out there. So half of the delegation from Oregon, all the delegation from California. I don't even know where Jayapal lives. Who cares? But they have also outsourced a lot of their shock troops, the NGOs. Acorn was an Obama campaign, hired $800,000 to conduct a get out the vote effort. Community organizer in chief credited them with his election, and they were Saul Alinsky inspired, like BLM Marxists we talked about. So combined, they all hate Republicans and Trump, and they came together under the Midwest Academy of Citizen Action Network and the Gamaliel Foundation, which in 1980s employed a promising Colombian graduate named Barack Obama. I
yep.
call them the left shock troops when they do things like try to burn down the federal building in Portland, like you said, with people inside, yet no one is in jail all these years later. When you see a campus protest or riots in LA last month, you see a lot of the same people from these groups. They travel. Scary ones are on the ones that tried to, with the firearms and civil unrest, like Social Democrats of America. There's Socialist Alternative, Party for Socialism and Liberation, Freedom Socialist Party, Socialist Rifle Association, yikes, International Socialist Organizations, all in Oregon. What other name groups do you know running around free out there?
Oh, they're all over the place, and I think there are too many to actually keep track of. The point is that they're all really going to the same direction, and that is that they want chaos in society. And a lot of it is driven by billionaires like George Soros. And I used to get some pushback from people saying, well, how is Soros connected? I said, well, he puts billions, and now his son puts billions into NGOs. The NGOs then deploy the money. And what is Soros's, one of his biggest legacies, not in a good way, is that his organizations and his money got a lot of people elected as district attorneys. They decided they couldn't get the laws changed to diminish the laws against criminal violence, either at the federal level or the state level. So they said, I know, will elect the DA. DAs used to be kind of a sleepy position. They were there to prosecute criminals, and it was, most people didn't care, even though almost every state in America has elected DAs in local communities. And why is that significant? Do you know America's the only place that has elected DAs?
Huh.
Most prosecutors.
Well, we used to call them governors in waiting, but now they've actually become
Well,
activists.
yeah, and there is some political climbing there, but an awful lot of DAs do 20, 30 years as DA, and then they go off to retirement. But in the rest of the world, the citizens do not elect their DAs, the prosecutors. The prosecutors are government bureaucrats.
Yeah.
And it's important that we have that control. Do you remember
In Tennessee, the AG is appointed by the Supreme Court, not
Now,
the
that's
governor.
the AG.
Yeah.
That's the Attorney
I
General.
know, but they're the top cop, right? So.
Well, they are, but who does the decision making in each county? There are 4,000 counties in America, roughly. And who makes the decision if somebody gets charged with a crime or not charged with a crime? That's the DA.
Absolutely.
The Attorney General is very often not involved. They're at state level crimes and other kinds of things, and they're great positions for mischief. But if the local DA decides this person has committed an assault, do we charge him with a crime or not? Let me tell you where that factors into what you and I have been talking about. So you have an awful lot of Antifa and BLM that committed a lot of crimes during the riots in 2020, for example. And there were a lot of people hurt, a lot of people went to the hospital. And you say, well, why weren't very many people charged with crimes? That was the decision of the local DA, not the Attorney General. On the other hand, there was one man in downtown Portland about 6 years ago, before the 2020 riots, named Mike Strickland. He was a guy who would go down and shoot videos of the Antifa and BLM folks mixing it up. And then he would publish these online. And he was very popular. And he'd been beaten up badly by Antifa and BLM before. So during an incident, he was simply standing on the sidelines taking video. You could do that. I could do that. Every American has the right to shoot video in a public place. 4 of the members of this group that he was shooting videos of began advancing on him. Now, they were holding long poles that had signs on them, but they were equally good as weapons, and they began advancing on him. He was carrying a pistol legally and lawfully with a permit. He pulled the pistol out, had it pointed to the ground.
Oh, yeah.
It was out of the holster because all this was caught on surveillance video for 4.5 seconds. That pistol was out of the holster. And he didn't shoot anybody. He didn't aim it at anybody. He pulled it out and held it at the low ready position. Well, what happened? The local DA charged him with 12 felonies and then managed to get a Multnomah County, that Multnomah County is the big county around Portland, a Multnomah County jury to convict him. So now, does he have Second Amendment rights anymore? Nope, he's a convicted felon. So they don't prosecute Antifa and BLM for actual assaults on people. They do prosecute a man who is, and by the way, when he pulled that pistol out and held it low ready, the 4 people who were advancing on him turned around and walked the other way. And so I don't think they felt threatened. Nobody screamed or yelled or ran away. It was just they realized this guy will protect himself. The fact is, in Multnomah County, you don't have a right as an American citizen to protect yourself against assaults like the assault on Jay Cho, like the assaults on Andy No, like the assaults on other
Island
people.
County, Washington, the DA went after a guy because he wouldn't wear a mask, and they're still to this day persecuting it. And then, of course, in King County, Washington, in their ultimate wisdom, they did away with the right to vote for a sheriff. I think it's the only county in America that is.
It may be the only one, and you're right. One of the wonderful things about sheriffs in America is that police answer to their political masters. The police chief answers to a city council or a mayor or both, which means the chief is not free to just do law enforcement the way his professional training tells him to, or her professional training tells her to. He has to do whatever his political masters say. So they can say, don't arrest people for these things, do arrest people for those things. The sheriff is different. The sheriff, as you point out, in every place except King County, Washington, which is King County is the big county around Seattle. The sheriff answers only to the voters. If the people are happy with the sheriff, as they were in, say, Maricopa County, where they kept reelecting Joe Arpaio, who I thought was a great sheriff for 30 years, they elected him over and over again. That was the voters saying, we believe this guy is doing the job the right way.
Or Snohomish County, where they tried to recall him 4 times.
Yep, but the problem is, what happens when you have people who can say, we're going to tell the police not to arrest some people, to arrest other people. You say, well, how do I fix that? Elect a new city council or a new mayor. Otherwise, you have no say in it, citizens. But with sheriffs, you do have a say, except in King County.
Right. So tell us about fond memories of Ted Wheeler and now Mayor Keith Wilson. He, him, and his pronouns bios served as Portland's first mayor in a new form of government. Born and raised in North Portland, this longtime business owner is focused on ending unsheltered homelessness, and I don't know, it's like redundant, and making Portland a great place to live, work, and visit. How's that going, and what's a new form of government?
It's going very, very badly. And since you mentioned Ted Wheeler, let me mention we had that guy for a couple of terms. I ended up interviewing him a couple of times. He was terrible. And he was a trust fund kid. I mean, again, he made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited millions from his granddad, who was a big timber operator in the Pacific Northwest. We called him Feckless Ted because we'd say, what are you going to do about these problems? And he would go out and try and make friends with Antifa and BLM. He got tear gassed as a result of that. In comes Keith Wilson, and I got to interview him one time, and he said he would come back, and he never has. Even after the interview, he said he would come back and take tough questions. Wilson had a business background. He ran a trucking company, and I thought, well, finally, somebody in somewhat the same mold as Trump, somebody who's used to a bottom line, who's used to employing people, who has to take risks as a business owner, who has solid responsibilities, things that must be done every day or your business goes away. And I thought, finally, we've got somebody who can actually make a difference. He has not. He promised to solve homelessness. It has not been solved. It's gotten worse. And now, on top of that, they have this new form of government because here was, I think, the logic, the way I would frame it. Portland used to have a city council of 5 members. They said, well, we're not getting good decisions out of 5, so maybe if we make it 12 people on the city council, we'll get better decisions. They're worse. By any estimation, they're worse. In fact, the latest conventional news coverage of the Portland City Council has been the City Council is still figuring out how they're supposed to operate. They have 12 members. It means anytime you diffuse responsibility, I mean, you or I may have bosses or people we answer to. At least you say, well, if I need a decision on this and I can't make that decision at my level, I know the one person I can go to, and that person can say yes or no, and they have to take responsibility. If the yes is the right decision or the wrong decision, they take the responsibility. At the city council in Portland, nobody's responsible. The mayor's powers have been dramatically diminished. They now have 12 people, and who's responsible for anything that happens? Nobody really knows.
Perfect.
And how are they going to make decisions? Again, nobody. But I will tell you one thing they've done recently that you should be aware of. Imagine this happening in your town. 4 members of the city council either have gone or are going to Vienna, Austria. And you say they're going on a city paid trip, cost about 50 grand. They're bringing staff members with them. Why are they going to Vienna, Austria? If I said Vienna, Austria, from a distance, I've never been there, what would your impression be? What kind of town do you suppose it is?
Probably very bohemian, I guess.
I think they're very rich.
Oh, okay,
sure. I think to live in Vienna, Austria, I mean, it's a historic city.
Yeah. Amadeus came from there.
Well, and again, and he was friends with the Medicis and all that. So,
and I think Hitler did some time there, if I'm not mistaken.
But imagine this. Why are they going to Vienna, according to these city council members, to study housing?
Oh,
now,
boy.
I'll give you 2 stunning numbers. What percentage of people in America, if I say the phrase public housing, what comes to your mind?
Little houses.
What is public housing like? Would you want to live in public housing?
No, Section 8 housing or Sturtevants in New York City. No, it's terrible.
Yep.
It's a ghetto.
All the places where there's crime and violence and drug dealing, and it's a horrible place to be, right?
Yes, sir.
5 to 8% of the American public lives in either owned housing, public housing owned by the government, or subsidized housing, Section 8. Now, would you like to hazard a guess in high dollar Vienna, Austria, what percentage of the population lives in subsidized housing or government owned housing?
0.
60%.
Oh, what? Wow, shocking.
60%. And you say, well, how is that? And I said, I have a feeling that if you live in a place that's very expensive to live in, because the average wage there for people that have jobs is very high. I've looked it up. per capita wages are really high. You say, but somebody has to pour your coffee. Somebody has to serve your meal. Somebody has to drive your car. Somebody has to nanny your kids. Somebody has to clean your house. Somebody has to do all those scut work jobs. So where are those people going to live if they're not in subsidized housing? So you're coming from Portland, Oregon, where housing is a problem mostly because of government regulations that make it hard to build housing, almost impossible to build housing. Tina Kotek, who you mentioned earlier, promised that she would double the amount of housing. When she came in, there were about 20,000 units of housing being built, apartments, houses, and all that. She said, I will double that to 40,000. You know what's happened instead? It dropped from 20,000 to 10,000, mostly because of government rules and regulations that make it expensive and difficult to get permission from the government to build housing. So these folks from the Portland City Council are going to Vienna, Austria to say, let's take a look at their housing model. Because I think they have in mind, just like Soros and the World Economic Forum.
They'll do like Gavin Newsom. They'll come back and say, we're going to do outdoor bathrooms.
Yeah, we're going to take Pacific Palisades and build public housing on some of the most expensive and desirable property in the country. And you say, well, they should live in nice places too. Really? You're going to, would you build public housing in Chevy Chase, Maryland?
Well, you'll be in a ghetto, but you'll have a view of the ocean. How lovely is that?
Yeah, and what will happen is it will become run down. It will become crime ridden. And it will cost the public a lot of money. And in 25 years, you'll have to rebuild all of it. And that's what they're going to study as the housing model for Portland.
Wow. So Antifa actually got Ted kicked out of his apartment by his neighbors because they shine lasers in his windows all night long. And he got tear gas, like you said, because he was thinking he was one of them. Like, these are my people. I can go out there. But no,
he's an idiot.
Yeah. So appeasement never works. A decade earlier to that, the rise of anarchy I started with in 1988 also was the infamous criminal Willie Horton was featured in an ad against Dukakis for George H.W. Bush. Being soft on crime worked against that, but now prison reform, we've gotten soft on crime. Yep. That gets liberals elected and it's getting people killed. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know, because for the life of me, I can't understand, because if the Democrats claim that they represent the underclass in America, I don't think that's accurate, but that's what they claim. Do you know who are the greatest number of people who fall victims of crime? Wealthy people or poor people? It's mostly poor people. And so when you say we're going to take the criminals who've been preying mostly on poor people, most criminals do not prey on the rich. It makes great movies when you have criminals that steal from the rich. But for the most part, the rich are very well protected in America. The poor are not. And the criminals are often poor as well. And so they steal from the people closest to them, which is other poor people. You would think that if you went to those people and said, hey, I've got a great idea, let's let the criminals do things with less punishment, that the people who are mostly the victims of those criminals would say, no, I'm not voting for you. I'm voting for the person who's going to enforce the laws. And yet the Democrats managed to hornswoggle a whole bunch of less affluent people in America into voting for them. I think that's coming to an end right now. Do you think that anybody out there, the average person out there, is shedding a tear over the 11 drug dealers in that boat that got blown up a week ago, or the 3 drug dealers that got blown up in the boat this week? Do you think any of them are saying, oh, that's not right? They should have taken those people into custody. They were in international waters, by the way. They were not on American soil. And bring them back to America for a full trial with ACLU lawyers and everything else, and then maybe lock them up for a couple of years. Do you think any average American thinks that, even a Democrat average American?
Just a Democrat senator from Maryland who flew down to have margaritas with that guy.
With Kilmar Abrego Garcia? Yeah.
But I think voting is dead, especially where you live. 4,000 citizens testified on the tax hike, 94% of them in opposition. $4.3 billion in higher taxes and fees over 10 years to fund a bloated Oregon Department of Transportation, potholes people. Democrats did it anyway. Why do they keep voting these people?
I really honestly don't understand the logic. I don't think there's any logic to it, so I'm going to keep holding up the other side of it. And on that note, I've got to get back to prep for my 2 shows today.
Okay, sir. I did want to ask why there's so many retirements going on in Pacific Northwest retirement, or in radio. If you want to give me 10 seconds on that, and then I'll let you go.
On retirements,
Yeah, I could go down the list of a whole bunch of longtime folks, not you, thankfully, but
I will
that.
tell you that the revenues have come out of talk radio to a large extent. It used to be a gigantic revenue generator, which is why iHeart was able to pay the great, and I think he was great, late and great, Rush Limbaugh, great talent in our industry. He was making 50 or 60 million a year, and you say, well, that's outrageous. I said, late night comics make almost that much money for telling jokes for an hour. Limbaugh actually delivered for Americans, but why were they able to pay him that money? Because he generated a lot of money. It's the same thing as in professional sports. If the NFL generates a lot of revenue, then its players get paid a lot of money. That's the only way it works. Something that doesn't seem to get across to some of the women's soccer players who say, we ought to make as much as the men. Well, generate the kind of revenue that they do in advertising and viewership audience. But the revenues have come out. The business has seen a lot of revenues go away, and I just think that is why you're seeing people retiring, because when they go in and say, hey, I'd like to make more money next year, and they say, well, no, given revenues, if anything, you're going to make less. And at some point they say, then I'll hang it up. I'm not hanging it up.
That's right. I was hoping you wouldn't say it was cultural and they decided it wasn't good for them anymore, but I understand.
No, I don't think it's cultural. I think it's honestly a revenue game because when you say I mean, I still have 4 or 5 million people listening on my national show and about 1 million people listening on the Northwest show. But consider the fragmentation of media that's happened in the last several decades. When I got into the business 50 years ago this year, there were basically local radio stations, local TV stations, three major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and then you had no cable, you had none of that. You had a lot of magazines, about 13,000 regularly published magazines in America. Most of the magazines have gone away, most of them, of the 13,000. There are still magazines that are out there, but they've been diminished dramatically. You have all kinds of places to advertise. You've got cable, you've got social media, you've got internet, you've got all that, and streaming and everything else. So what revenue there was is now split up in a lot of ways that it was never split up, say, 30 years ago.
That's a good point. Well, special shout out then to Seattle radio icon Mark Christopher after 45 years, Dave Ross after 47 years at Cairo, John Carlson. Who else did I have on this
John's
list?
a great friend.
Tim Hunter, Greg Herschel, Ross Reynolds, Bob Rivers, Dory Monson, who died, of course, Danny Bonaducci. Just want to acknowledge them for being in it as long as you and no longer in the game. But Lars, I want to thank you for your time. I know you got to run. Do you want to tell anyone where your social media is? Then I'll let you go.
Yeah, you can go to larsllarson.com, spelled O-N, although we also have the E-N domain that I bought, I don't know, 40 years ago. LARSLARSON.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I finally gave up on Facebook. They would have technical problems and we'd get banned occasionally. I never understood that, and I finally told my producers, I'm tired of dealing with Facebook's problems and their lack of willingness to try to fix the problems when it was their problem and not our problem. So I just pulled the plug, and it was sad because I had 120,000 people following me on Facebook, and I just said, I'm pulling the plug. So when people send me Facebook links, I can't even open them up because I don't have a Facebook account. But we gave up on it. Twitter, I've stayed with Twitter, now X. And Instagram, and we have a loyal following there as well.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inspiring me to keep doing this myself. So I will let you go. Hang on, folks. I will be right back. Sing a song about the heartland, the only place I feel at home. Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone. Thanks for coming back. I love you guys. And if you didn't come back, tell your friends they should have come back because I love them. It's that time to remind everyone to please subscribe to heartlandjournal.com. That's how we grow and keep this content for you free. Now, the Heartland Journal news. 10 suspects charged in July 4th attack on Texas ICE detention facility. Did you know about this? Nearly a dozen violent assailants equipped with tactical gear and weapons attacked U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Prairie Land Detention Facility in Alvarado, Texas on July 4th, shooting a local law enforcement officer in the process. The officer is expected to recover, thank God. This escalation in violence is incomprehensible, and those responsible will be held accountable to the full extent of the law, said Acting ICE Director Todd M. Lyons. This is precisely what we have been warning against as disinformation and dangerous politically motivated rhetoric spreads. We are thankful to Alvarado Police Department responding officers and that the officer injured has been discharged from the hospital. We will continue to work with the FBI and Texas Rangers as they investigate and prosecute those involved. The task, which occurred just days before an armed activist shot a U.S. Border Patrol officer in McAllen, Texas, was coordinated to vandalize the facility and disrupt operations there. Coordinated. The FBI has arrested 10 of the 11 suspects, and the Johnson County Sheriff has confirmed that each now face local charges of terrorism, aggravated assault on a public servant with a deadly weapon, or aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against a peace officer. The final suspect is still at large. I am relieved to hear that the officer who was shot is expected to recover from the injuries sustained, said Acting ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Dallas Field Officer Director Josh Johnson during a July 7 press conference. Fortunately, no employees at our facility were harmed during the shooting incident on July 4th. ICE officials currently face a 700% increase in assaults as activists masquerading as immigrant advocates continue to impede operations. On July 2, a man repeatedly rammed an ICE vehicle with his car in Linda Vista, California, before 3 activists attacked agents. The Department of Homeland Security has vowed to pursue criminal charges for anyone obstructing ICE operations or assaulting federal law enforcement officers. Wonder how many have driver's license from Oregon. Trump suggests TikTok deal has been reached. A deal was also reached on a certain company that young people in our country very much wanted to save, President Trump said, by Natalia Mittelstad. President Trump suggested on Monday that a deal has been reached regarding the social media app TikTok. The big trade meeting in Europe between the United States of America and China has gone very well. It will be concluding shortly, Trump posted on Truth Social. A deal was, how funny, talking about TikTok on his Truth Social. A deal was also reached on a certain company that young people in our country very much wanted to save. They will be very happy. I will be speaking to President Xi on Friday. The relationship remains a very strong one, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. President DJT. The announcement comes ahead of the Wednesday deadline for the short video app's U.S. assets to be divested or shut down, Reuters reported Sunday. The outlet had reported that Trump was expected to extend the deadline for TikTok to be sold by or divested from China's ByteDance. This extension, of which a source informed Reuters, would be the 4th of the original January deadline set by a law that Congress passed. After taking office on January, do you understand that? Congress passed a law saying get rid of it. Trump is negotiating. This is the 4th extension to get rid of it. And it harms our kids. We know this. After taking office on January 20th, Trump first extended the deadline to early April, then from May to June, and a third time to September. Here we are. Trump said last month that he had U.S. buyers lined up for the app and could extend the deadline again. However, on Sunday, Trump said regarding TikTok's future, I may or may not. We're negotiating TikTok right now. We may let it die, or we may, I don't know. It depends. Up to China. It doesn't matter too much. I'd like to do it for the kids. What? The White House did not respond to Reuters' request for comment on the expected extension for the app that is used by 170 million Americans. On Sunday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer began trade talks with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and China's top trade negotiator Li Chenggang in Spain that will include TikTok, but a deal is not expected before September 17th, tomorrow, according to Reuters sources. Next story, Tom Emmer says that crime is #1 issue that can cost Dems the midterms. House Majority Whip Tom Emers is urging Republicans to highlight their support for President Donald Trump's crime crackdown efforts, arguing that voters will reject Democrats at the ballot box for supporting soft-on-crime policies that made their own communities less safe. Emmer, the 3rd highest ranking House Republican, told the Daily Caller News Foundation in a recent interview that he expects law and order issues to dominate the midterms, labeling crime the #1 issue on voters' minds. The Majority Whip argues that the Democratic Party's repeated failure to address crime despite voters' widespread concerns about safety is likely to hurt the party's chances of retaking the House in 2026. That's why you have to hear this from me. You won't hear this on the mainstream media news. They like it. Emmers referenced an August AP and ORC survey that found 81% of Americans, including 68% of Democrats, the MSNBC listeners, and 96% of Republicans view crime as a major problem in large cities. A majority of voters also approve of President Donald Trump's handling of crime, according to the poll. When one party offers you safety and security and the other one offers you more crime and chaos, which one do you think you're going to pick when you go into the ballot box? Emmer told the DCNF, Daily Caller News Foundation. The answer is clear. It will be reflected big time in the midterms next year. We'll see. That will be bucking the historical trend. Usually the party out of power picks up seats in the midterm. We'll find out very soon. Emmer spoke to the DCNF in the wake of the fatal stabbing of Ukrainian refugee Uryana Zarutska, who sought safety in the United States from the war in Ukraine. The 23-year-old woman who was brutally murdered by repeat offender DeCarlos Brown Jr., 34, on a Charlotte, North Carolina light rail train on August 22nd. The good news for us is just like the inflation issue, citizens know what they see and what they feel, Emmer added. Emmer said he was focused, inflation, oh my goodness. Emmer said he was focused on encouraging the country's slate of Democratic governors, including Tim Walz from his home state of Minnesota, to cooperate with Trump to fight crime. We interviewed the guy running against Tim Walz. The majority whip invoked D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who recently signed an executive order to indefinitely extend the D.C. Police Department's cooperation with federal authorities. The move has earned her plaudits from the president. She has partnered now with President Trump, and she is benefiting, and so are the people that hired her to be the mayor of D.C., Emmer told the DCNF. I think that's the best thing that we can do is encourage these failed governors to cooperate. You don't have to like the president, Emmer continued, but at the end of the day, you were hired to protect citizens and their property. Amen. That's it for this episode. Thank you, Lars Larson. Great radio name. Much easier than Abramowitz. Easy to remember. Thank you for sticking it out in one of the most out of control areas of America and not just giving up and reporting from a safer, saner place, but actually staying on the battlefield and reporting from behind enemy lines. Like Walter Duranty, Stalin's reporter, only not a sold-out communist sympathizer, more like Gareth Richard Vaughan, a Welsh journalist who in March 1933 first reported in the Western world without equivocation and under his own name the existence of the Soviet famine of 1930 to 1933, including the Holodomor. Google it. Good press. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. More like this to come very soon. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Monday. It's the Radio Northwest Network, and it's my pleasure to be with you. And it's an invitation as well. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here at 866-HEY-LARS. And naysayers always go right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. And that throat clearing you just heard is Steve Abramowitz, who is the owner of the Mill Creek Inn and the new Snohomish View newspapers and former president of Parents Trust for Washington Children. Steve, welcome to the program.
Hi, Lars. Thanks so much for having me. Connection's not so great, but thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry about the connection. I wish we could control your end of it, but you got me curious because you wrote to me and you said, I'm the owner of both the Mill Creek View and the new Snohomish View newspapers and podcast. After 20 years in the state I love and raising two kids with a wife that's a native Washingtonian, we are leaving. Now, you're emblematic of an awful lot of emails and phone calls I get from people who say, we love the region, but it's driving us away. And I wanted to get you on and sort of get your take on what has affected you so powerfully in the Pacific Northwest that you'd say we're going to pull up stakes and we're going to move all the way across the country to Tennessee.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's actually in process as we speak. It's a sad thing, Lars. The Pacific Northwest is amazing. My wife's roots are here, born and raised. Her siblings are here. Just so many things. Her religious upbringing is here. But over the 22 years that I've been here, I came from California. Similar situation at the time when I was starting my career, just a young guy out of college. The tide turned quite a bit, and we're very active in our lifestyle. So we participate in a lot of groups that we think are interesting and entertaining and educational and fun and family bringing them up. And we got to see the rot. We got to see the poison that has been creeping in. And so at the time we lived in King County, we lived in Seattle. And when my daughter was 5, my son was 7, we were a swim club that was in a swim league. And it was great. Summertime like now, out in the sun, healthy exercise, everybody doing their part to put points on the board. And my daughter was a champion. And 15 years later, unbeknownst to us, 15 years ago, unbeknownst to us, the WAIA passed a transgender law, or whatever it is, a bylaw that would allow for inclusiveness. No drugs necessary, just everybody should be fair and swim in a lane that they thought was best for them. Nobody ever heard of it, didn't know anything about it. This year, this private club that we're a member of, that's family owned, decided it was time to make some bylaws and rules that were much more extreme than that, although using the guise of saying have to get in line with the WA members of. And the task force that was put together is people that you just wouldn't think have the right to make these type of decisions because they're not medical. They are somewhat educators, or somewhat coaches, but they are taking some very, very complex, serious issues and dropping on everybody. They were supposed to vote on this April 26th, but I think because of uproar, they moved it to October. And in the meantime, I don't know if you know what that is, but they're the international group that said, no, you can't do this at the national level, that kind of had some sanity, but they're pushing this instead on 12, 11, and 13-year-olds. And it gets a little complicated, but basically they say if you want to compete after the age of 12, you have to have hormone blockers and puberty blockers in order to do that. So that means for 1 year, which means by age 11, you have to have that kicked in. So long story short, there's no way I was going to let my daughter, I'm just a concerned dad, excuse me, go for this. So
okay, because, hold on, one of the things that I thought you really put a pinpoint on it, you said they're pushing swim teams to open the girls' locker rooms to men. And now even the Aqua Club's board in Kenmore, Washington, is going along with it, meaning the practical effect of it is you send your 10, 12, 14-year-old daughter to swim club, and you say, by the way, she may be in a locker room with biological men.
So that too, Lars, there's both, right? So they're going to do the locker rooms, which means that everybody is in danger. If you read any of the statistics, say, coming out of the prisons, or things that I read regularly, that in Nordstrom's bathrooms or Starbucks bathrooms where they've allowed this, that would happen in a swim team, family-owned, private. But that's part of it, which is a terrible part of it. I'd hate to be the parent who has to deal with that if that 1 in a million chance happens, if that's what they think it is. But then there's the forced drugs. If they want to compete after age 14, they have to have had the puberty blockers or hormones for 1 year prior. So that tells them if they don't want to do that, their competition is over. They can only do exhibitions.
But it also means that it's a private organization that's telling parents, if you want your child who was born a girl but now wants to be a boy or vice versa, you've got to go down and get the doctor to dose them up with these puberty blockers, which, as far as I'm concerned, a parent doing that to a child, because it's the parent who's asking the doctor for the treatments, is child abuse. So, but the club is saying
and it's coming down from this GSSL, this Greater Seattle Summer Swim League. One man, calls himself a man, identifies as a man, who is a public educator, says this is the way we're going to do it. He wrote a 13-page rules and regulation bylaw, got the board, none of which that I can figure out have any children, to agree with him. Maybe there's some dissenters. I don't know. The president is not the president anymore after that April 26th pass the buck. So he's driving this. He also likes to read, books on identity to young children. It's all online, all public, not a secret. He's driving this beyond what even the WAIA inclusiveness is talking about. And so, like I said, my daughter, since 5 years old, who's now 16, dreamed of graduating on the podium and can't do it now because they wouldn't answer our questions as to whether they would allow those locker rooms to open or not. It's child abuse.
I think it is. And I think the fact that it's being pushed not just by government entities like public schools, but being pushed by private organizations makes it even worse because now we're seeing that this wokeism is getting pushed out into society, and everybody feels as though they can't stand up and object to it, even though it seems completely unreasonable to most parents out there. Steve Abramowitz is the owner of the Mill Creek View and the new Snohomish View newspapers, former president of the Parents Trust for Washington Children. Steve, thanks for coming on. It's a great illustration of why this is a problem. Glad to be with you on a Monday. Always glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS.
Call their home, try to find some place to rest their bones, while the angels and the devils try to make them their own. Where the bad folks go when they die? They don't go to heaven where the angels fly. Go to a lake of fire. Yeah, I've been dreaming of the wild, wild plains, walking where the pine trees dance, where the river runs deep and the bird calls sing.
Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.